Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Khoury. I'm the founding director of the Center for Design, and happy to host this new installation of our conversation series, full series, 2024, and actually we're still celebrating mode, like it's the 5th year of this series. And we went through a lot of different contents, celebration, and we went through very, very different contents and topics. This is part of the nature of the Center for Design, very interdisciplinary. We only work with design if design is coupled with another discipline at least. So that's what we try to do, and we use the conversations to explore new or potential avenues for research, for design research to be applied. And we had something about game design in the past, XR in the past. But what seems to be nowadays a trend is AI, and maybe it couldn't be otherwise, given the importance and the relevance of this emerging technology in our field. And game design was spatial design, and it's that's something that we still need to learn. We started dealing with AI in 2023 with this designing with AI approaches and methods. That was the first time we ever discussed about AI and design as a potential relationship. We embraced data visualization in a couple of iterations. So when the first one was what data visualization can do for AI, and the other one was what AI can do for data visualization. So we explored the two sides of this mutual relationship. And today we have yet another conversation about AI and other emerging technologies and potential relationship with design and design research. But I leave the stage to Casper, Harteveld, our professor in game design and associate dean for graduate programs at Khoury, to set the ground for this conversation. Thank you for joining and enjoy the ride.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna set up the slides, so that might be a bit of a jarring moment. Yes, all right, awesome, great. All right, so now we can start. Sorry about these technical things. Maybe we need to have some AI to help us with this. Great, so this conversation is about XR, AI, and design, and specifically thinking about how design can be a bridge towards XR and AI. There's a lot of great, exciting developments, and we heard a lot about XR and AI and how they can be combined. And I want to bring design into this conversation, which obviously this is a really great forum for it. I also want to preface that we have two great panelists here to discuss this, but I really would like this to be an open conversation for everybody to engage with. People online, people here in person. We also set up tables like this to really have this be kind of like a roundtable conversation. So I really encourage everybody to chime in and join this conversation with all of us. And hopefully this will be a conversation that continues outside of this hour. I want to start this conversation with providing a little bit of context, maybe somewhat provocative in some ways, maybe not provocative to some. And in that case, I challenge you to be more provocative towards me. So let's get started with this. So first of all, what is AI? What is extended reality? I just want to set the stage here for some who don't really necessarily have a good understanding of either or of these. So AI is all around us, and there's all these techniques, and you'll hear these terms about machine learning, neural networks. But basically, what it all comes down to, these are all systems and techniques that try to help us do things that typically requires human intelligence. And in some ways, they can do things that obviously goes beyond what we can usually be capable of. Large language models, great example of that. They can read thousands of text, books, and etc. that we cannot even do, in our, entire lifetime. So that could really greatly empower us. Of course, we need to also be cognizant of what AI can and cannot do. But this is sort of like what AI can help with. They can learn things, they can help predict things, and they can help us perform better in certain tasks that we do. Extended reality, on the other hand, is sort of like an umbrella term. And it consists of augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. Virtual reality is where you're completely immersed into the situation. Augmented reality is where you have an interface that helps you suggest items in the real world, so you're acting in the real world. And the mixed reality is where you bring virtual elements into your current settings. And in a way, I think the term extended reality is kind of nice because in a way, it always is about extending our realities, whether it's from fully immersing to just augmenting our existing realities. So that's basically the starting point. Now, what do I mean with this killer app? There's been all these articles around, some of them are really focused on generative AI and how that could be combined with augmented reality or how that could be combined with virtual reality. There's this notion that this will create all kinds of new jobs for students that would be probably of key interest. And then there's folks who are basically saying, and I actually want to challenge this later on, to say that XR is actually the interface of AI. So we have all these AI applications like LLMs and whatnot, and now we are on the computer doing this, both of you, but saying that XR is basically the way that of how we will be interacting with AI. And of course, we see certain elements of that already. Some of you may have Alexa in your home or other tools where you're basically communicating in a spatial sense. The object is there and you're talking to it, as opposed to you sitting behind your computer. And of course, some people are working towards that. So obviously, I also asked the AI, what's the killer app that you think would be? That's what we nowadays do. So in this case, it considers it to be an immersive, personalized training across various industries, yada yada, that adapts, blah 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 blah. So that's great. I think it's a very focused way, but the personalized, adaptive side of it is what makes it kind of interesting, right? Like if you just have a virtual reality application or augmented reality application that is designed in a certain way, it's just designed in one way. And the AI can basically change the content, adapt it, and also potentially is able to change it in a way that suits you as an individual. So to that end, it nailed it, but obviously there's many more possibilities of what can be done. Now, as an example, and this is where I'm going to turn up my volume and hopefully not too jarring. So let's see.
This is work.
What's up, Mike?
We're giving eyes and ears to AI. So the world becomes your prompt and your interface. This is work. Working. These are thoughts happening.
Hey, co-pilot.
Plans populating.
Co-pilot, when was this last replaced?
Information gathering. Instructions guiding. Schematics aligning. People connecting. Problem solving.
Co-pilot?
Hey, co-pilot. Co-pilot.
This is confidence growing. Eyes widening. These are questions.
I just finished co-pilot. What's next?
Rotate the engine block 90 degrees.
Questions the way you ask them.
Please get me the detailed view of the optical cable layout.
Never too many questions.
All right. Let's highlight the relay switches.
Go ahead. Keep asking.
It's in position. What's next?
Keep learning.
The hydraulic filter was changed 6 months ago.
Okay, can you pull up a service record?
Co-pilot, what's the tolerance of this locking ring?
Here is a copy of the last service record. The tolerance is 9,000ths of an inch.
Remind me where this fits into the assembly.
Step 4, align the spindle. The locking ring is highlighted.
This is work getting smarter. This is work working better. This is work working. This is work making sense of the world around you.
Co-pilot, let Ruth know that I'm finished and close out the work order.
This is AI for the front line.
All right, so that's a great example of combination of XR and AI, and specifically mentioned. There's the co-pilot, there's the headset, But the question is, does it work? And to that, the answer is not entirely fully a yes, because the equipment you saw was the HoloLens, and Microsoft discontinued the HoloLens. Copilot's still there, of course, but this shows that, there's these visions about how XR plus AI could transform the workplace, but we're still struggling to actually accomplish that vision. Now, here's another example, and I'm sorry, I'm going to do the same thing, which is a little bit more futuristic in some ways. All right.
Modern technology promises to keep us more connected. But in surrounding ourselves with screens and devices, it feels as though we've lost something. Imagine if we could replace our screens with something that informs without distraction. Could we see differently, more clearly? Could it help us find that invisible edge when we need it most? Or allow us to connect in crucial moments, providing vital information in an instant? Introducing Mojo Lens, the world's first augmented reality smart contact lens. Put Mojo Lens on in the morning, and throughout your day, you'll have access to timely information without losing focus on the world around you. Mojo Lens is designed not to bombard you with data, but to elevate your vision by providing the information you need exactly when it's needed, all while letting you look like yourself. When it's not in use, the technology just fades away. We call this concept invisible computing.
Mojo's invisible computing solution will be a platform that gives you everyday superpowers and an invisible edge throughout your day. But before it does any of that, it first has to be a great contact lens that improves your natural vision even when it's off. Mojo Lens built-in display will give you augmented reality wherever you look. It even works with your eyes closed, putting you into an instant VR world.
The applications are nearly limitless, from being able to see in the dark or low light situations, to augmenting your memory with instant information, showing you real-time translations, or giving you a virtual teleprompter. One of our first medical applications is using AR overlays like edge detection and contrast enhancements to help people with vision impairments such as glaucoma and macular degeneration.
Building the world's first AR contact lens is a systems engineering problem, and therefore we've had to innovate in many.
I'll stop here. Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, you want it, but the thing is, this also didn't work out. So they talk about the visible computing. Not that I'm trying to trash all these companies, by the way. I think this is a part of innovation, right? Some things work, some things don't work. And here you see the company is continuing with micro LED displays, but this vision of the contact lens, and maybe at some point something like this emerges, but it also didn't really, pan out. So, I had to laugh when they talked about the visible computing because, it's kind of invisible right now. But it is still kind of like a provocative vision of how things could be. And especially, we were talking also about ways in terms of us having integrated computing aspects, right? Like where we have chips or places, and this already gets to that particular point. So, and of course, this is not completely unfamiliar. I mean, there's been many companies before too. The Google Classes, for people who remember, that was also supposed to really transform the way of how we would work, live, and play and learn. That also didn't really work out for all kinds of ways. And we also see, much recently, and much to the regret of some of my PhD students who've been working with this, there's been really exciting advances also in immersive healthcare to help people with rehabilitation. And this company, Penumbra, just recently laid off their entire immersive healthcare. So there's all these great opportunities and these advances, but for some reason, we're still not really making headway, or we're getting into areas where things are just not working out the way that we want them to be. Of course, we continue to find advances. So the latest headset that is going to be released is from Meta, called Aria. And specifically, the headline is talking about the killer app is around accelerating AR and AI from a human perspective. And I want to emphasize the human perspective because that also goes to design. And what's really great about this is that, initiatives are taken where, for instance, using this headset, we can look at all kinds of activities. And this is what's called the Ego Exo 4D data set. So we can see how people are playing soccer, how they're cooking. And that really allows us to create a lot of great data that could be leveraged by AI that when we are starting to cook, we could get all kind of suggestions or use all kind of references that will allow us to do our jobs and activities in a much better way. So next time you want to try to fix your bike, you put on the area headset or whatever headset is available, and it can guide you exactly through what you need to do. So here we are here about why design. So there are a couple things, and I hope to hear many other perspectives and suggestions from all of you. But a couple things. The first thing I'm thinking about, this comment about this person who says that XR is the interface for AI. You could agree or disagree with it, but I think actually design is the interface. Design allows us to really think about the ways that these different technologies can be integrated into our real world place. And it's really important because, as you can see, lots of these products are not working out. There might be technological issues with it too, but I also strongly believe there's not enough emphasis on design and how design can really play a role in making these technologies work in our daily lives. There's the human perspective too. There's a lot of issues with the technologies. We recently experienced, Eileen and I played an escape room game yesterday as part of our ongoing project. And this was us playing around. And, I had a headache after doing this for a half an hour. You have to read in the virtual reality, or this was a mixed reality actually. And that was really challenging, but also just the whole experience. And I wasn't the only one who had a headache afterwards. So there's still a lot of aspects that we need to improve and address. There's also, there's also the responsible perspective. And here's where I'm going to do the sound thing as well, which was from Luca. Oh, okay, good. So.
Welcome back. We've all heard about those smart glasses, but did you know there is a way to use the glasses to learn personal information about strangers just by looking at them?
Yeah, this is some frightening stuff here, right? So there's 2 Harvard students that are now highlighting the privacy vulnerabilities that are associated with these glasses. NBC Boston's Bianca Beltran spoke with those students today. She's joining us live in Cambridge with this story. Bianca?
And Colton, Priscilla, the students behind this say that they can imagine some situations where it would be helpful to have this technology, but it's also easy to imagine how the information gathered in this way can be used in a harmful way. And so they're hoping that by showing what is already possible, that it might prompt people to take a few extra steps to protect their personal information.
We built glasses that let you identify anybody on the street. The information our tool collects from just a photo of your face is staggering.
The reactions Harvard juniors Anfu Nguyen and Kane Ardafio got when they showed people how quickly they could learn personal information about them, like their address and family members' names, ranged from amazement to shock.
Is your address 4 Valley?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
They were like, oh my God, I've never seen that photo of me before. So it was pretty clear to us that a lot of the data that we were able to uncover using these relatively simple tools is people didn't even know that existed.
They use smart glasses that anyone can buy to stream a live video feed to a computer program. That program uses an existing reverse image search tool to connect a face to a name. Using artificial intelligence, the data is compiled onto an app on their phone within a minute, allowing them to test out the project they call Eye X-ray on unsuspecting strangers.
Oh, hi, ma'am. Wait, are you Betsy?
Yes. Are you Kashi?
Yes.
Basically, why we did this was to raise awareness of how much data we have just publicly available. All of the data that we collect is publicly accessible by anyone. People were rightfully scared, and that's why, when we started building this, we opted to also make that guide to basically solve the problem immediately after we described.
All right, and this the host had the best last name, by the way. I'm not sure you saw, but no, his last name was Casper. Priscilla Casper. I pay attention to that for some reason. All right, so the other last thing that I want to show is that design can also allow us to have a transformative perspective. And what I mean is that it can do and use the technologies in ways that maybe we have not imagined. An example one I want to provide, and this is, I'm going to just do this on the website because I couldn't get this to work in my slides. So hopefully this works. And this is basically using augmented reality to create a performance. And the performance is narrated by nobody less than Ian McKellen.
Space and time. We think of them as fixed, inevitable, absolute. But suppose it isn't so simple. Imagine if in the right place at the right time, at just the right angle, you could find the tiniest crack in the infinite layers of space and time, through which you could glimpse somewhere else, somewhere new. Through the Cracks, brought to you by English Touring Theatre and Office of Everyone.
So this is basically an augmented reality app where you could have a play happen anywhere. You just point your phone at the floor, and then the cracks start to appear, and the play comes out of it. So those are really kind of different ways where we can think about, how are we looking at performances? How are we thinking about music? And that's also a way where design can play a role. So in short, as my concluding this whole idea of setting up the conversations, how can design act as a bridge to kind of create these kind of killer apps that are a useful interface extension of our lives, also humane in every kind of sense of the way. And I didn't touch on many aspects such as accessibility that are also responsible, but also in the end transformative. So, and I also would argue, why don't we talk more about design and less so about technology? So with that, I will stop and give the word. And and now I did this. So we're great. Maybe Eileen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Eileen McGivney. I'm an assistant professor in art and design and communication studies. And my research is really about education and virtual reality, how people learn with these immersive technologies. And thinking about some of the things Casper just presented and this conversation, there were a couple of thoughts that I had, and I'll share about two different projects. So I think this is, one really an interesting topic, thinking about putting design forward when we think about how to continue developing these technologies. And that's something that I really try to, teach a lot in my classes as well, because I do think that there's a lot of questions about well, what do we want to use these things for, rather than let's just advance the technology as much as possible. And that's why I think, when I see something like those contacts, I have the opposite reaction from you. I'm like, I do not want that. Because my mind immediately jumps to something like, if anyone's watched the short film Hyper Reality, where you're essentially walking through a giant advertisement and the AI is controlling and telling you everything you have to do essentially as a gig worker, right? So I think about all the ways that technologists could promote these tools in ways that essentially will, lessen our lives. And I think designers kind of take a different approach, where we think about what are the goals that we have, and then how do we use technologies to achieve those. So anyway, so two things when I think about my work in education, two ways that I think AI intersecting with XR will have a really big impact. One is, I think the promise of learning technologies for a long time has been to be able to give people more personalized, more hands-on experiences, and have more agency in their learning. And yet what we see with a lot of virtual reality experiences is those things are restricted because of limitations of the way you have to create the experiences, right? So if you create a learning game or a learning experience, a lot of times it's very prescribed, the steps you have to go through, because the developer has to be, the computing power is not strong enough, right? And we don't have the opportunities to really kind of personalize the experience. So, one project, the project Casper and I are working on, where we were, trying a mixed reality escape room, is using AI to have an agent inside the VR experience that prompts the learner to reflect on what they're doing. So in this case, it will be an escape room and they'll be solving puzzles. And then the reflection tool will help people think through what are the deeper structures of problem solving that you're engaging in, and how are those skills going to kind of carry through to the next puzzle, and then ultimately like into solving other types of problems. And that's really different from what we have now, where if we want someone to slow down and process their learning, we usually have them take off the headset, or we just pause the experience and ask them to write a reflection or maybe speak that reflection, but they're not able to get feedback from the reflection prompt. It's not personalized to them. It doesn't intervene at a specific time when people really need it. And so AI actually opens up a whole new way of doing that. And there's lots of other ways that you could think about people interacting with environments that actually update to what they need, in the moment, this kind of just-in-time learning opportunities, which is much more beneficial. So I think like that's one way that I can see AI really helping improve design of XR learning environments, is kind of in that personalization and like meeting people where they are. The other way that I think is really important is actually in giving people more power to design and create their own XR environments. So right now, if you want to be somebody who can create a new VR experience for education, you have to, come to Northeastern and do a master's degree in extended reality and take many classes on XR development and design and, or kind of have a background in computer science. And it takes a lot of investment to be able to create a new experience. And I think what AI affords us is the opportunity for building platforms then that educators can, and students even, can create their own learning experiences. So the example project I'll give for that is, I don't know who's online. I don't know if Tommy is here, but Tommy and I, who's a PhD student, second year PhD student, are working on a tier 1 with faculty in the Buffet School of Health Sciences, Leanne Chakosky, Heidi Cheerman. And what we're creating is a virtual reality experience where you have an AI patient that then students can practice interacting with to practice their communication skills, right? And what this allows us is right now, students have 1 to 2 opportunities in a year to visit the physical simulation lab where they hire actors and you run through simulation of, being in a hospital situation. And then you have your actual like co-op or, residencies or whatever it is for medical education where you get to go interact with patients. And one thing we did talking with faculty and students doing focus groups and a more participatory design process was finding out that they would just like more reps to be able to practice these things before they're actually in a clinical setting. And then also they would like more reps with more varied, scenarios, actually, especially different types of patients and patients who are in different levels of duress and pain, who are hooked up to machinery, who have physical ailments. They can't actually replicate that in the physical simulation lab very easily. They'd have to get many different actors or many different simulations. So that's what we're creating. But ultimately what we want, we're gonna Tommy's designing the prototype. We're gonna be testing that out. But ultimately we'd like to broaden this out to a larger project where faculty from the health sciences programs could themselves program the patient, right? So all they need to do is upload a new patient history with a different diagnosis. The tool has the opportunity to change their affect, right? So they're more or less aggressive. They're more or less afraid. And, maybe their education level, their medical literacy, and they can then give students the opportunity to practice in these different scenarios, but it's coming from the faculty who know what their students need to learn, and they're actually designing it themselves. So I think that's the other thing. That's a long way of saying, I think AI can be a really powerful tool to put creation into the hands. Of course, we need a VR developer like Tommy to kind of help create the platform, but then AI can help you customize this. And I've seen for example, elementary school teachers who have a virtual reality kind of cave system in their school, and they're using an AI tool, Blockade, to help students brainstorm and create settings for their English language arts classes, right? So they're talking about books and setting, and then they can actually start to say, okay, well, if the story's taking place in this, let's give the AI a prompt of what we think it should look like. And then let's change, and how does that change, you know, the way we think about environments? So things like that, I think, are really powerful and start to give us the tools of creation without needing a ton of expertise and being a Unity or Unreal developer or something like that. So those are a couple things I was thinking about of, you know, the way AI can kind of change the game for VR in education.
Thank you. The next panelist is Wallace. So Wallace, share your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, I think, so I'm Wallace, joint appointed in College of Arts and Design, Department of Arts and Design, Khoury College of Computer Science. So our lab work is the intersection between like designing your experiences and understanding perception, why the experiences are the way they are, right? So thanks, Casper. I mean, also very good comments. I just want to react to the video that you showed in the beginning, right? So to talk about show the Mojo lenses there. And the person who is talking, just saying, oh, you should buy this, is wearing glasses, right? It's like, okay, interesting. Your choice to choose glasses. And of course, that brings like to what you said, like, okay, should I buy it? Should I not buy it, right? Do I want to do, I don't, but should I not have it? So the same thing happened with like Google Glass, right? That brings to this just second, I think your last video, talking about the like privacy concerns and like the social implications of that, right? When I was coming here this morning, I was thinking about, okay, what I'm going to say there in like 5 minutes, and thinking about, okay, what is the connection there between like design and XR and AI, right? Some of my work has to do with AI, but very little. So we're now working on a project, which is, I think, is very unique in the sense that we're using AI, but we're not trusting AI, right? So if you're building, you know, a simulation, because a typical example of like an AI XR intersection is thinking about agents, right? Virtual agents, it can be human agents, but it can also be pets or any kind of organism. And kind of like a human interface to a system, which is funny when you talk about like, you know, invisible computing. Like Mark Eisen would say like that, you know, virtual reality is the completely opposite, right? Of interacting visibly with your environment. Like it completely shuts it off, right? But anyway, coming back to the issue of acceptability, right? So Google Glass had that same drawback, right? Where people would like be aggressive to other people who were like using the glasses because they were afraid that they were being filmed, right? They didn't understand what was it. They wanted to preserve their privacy. And I guess we forgot about that for some time. But now videos like that are bringing it back, right? So despite the best efforts to make it like look like regular glasses, so you don't have like the nerd face anymore, and making sure there's always like a privacy cam on, it's still going to be an issue for a lot of people, right? Like, should I buy one and be here recording that you all here instead of being in the department meeting, right? Maybe it's not a good idea, right? So where does design come in my view, right? So thinking about design like broadly, right? Thinking about, you know, like Herbert Simon like idea of like, oh, we are building things, right? Science of the artificial. We're building something because we want, you know, the way we live to be better, right? So designing as building something and changing our existing condition to something that is better than we have right now. And then we talk about AI. A lot of times we don't really know where we're actually going, right? To begin with, they're like most models today are black boxes. We don't know how they behave. If you just throw our like language model into, you know, a patient, it may say what you expect. It may say what you don't expect. It may hallucinate. You have like very little control about what's going to happen in there. So when we think about this technology, I think both like AI, if you think about the world with AI, but no XR, and if you think about the world with XR and no AI, right? Those will like radically change the way we interact with each other, interact with the world, right? And if you connect the two together, right, you have an even bigger problem, right? You have like two like very complex social technical systems, right? They modulate how we communicate with each other and interact with each other. Now joining together to build an even more complex world, where like issues that we have today, like social media and so on, we're just going to be much larger and much difficult to control, right? You can think about all sorts of like ethical dilemmas, like talking to your, dead grandmother or recording your baby every step and saying so that you can have a digital copy of him when he grows up, right? How should we decide and think about whether those things should happen, should not happen? How do we drive the direction where we want to go with like XR and AI and those two things combined, right? And that's where I think design comes in, right? Thinking about where we should go and how should we get there. Think about what is the final state that we want of the world and make sure that these technologies go in the direction that we want them to go, despite what computer science may want them to become, right? And I think design brings this unique perspective of understanding our relationship with each other, understanding our relationship with technologies, and it can help guide us to a better future. So this is in a summary. That's my thought that I want you to do.
Nice. One thing was where you were talking, I was thinking about, we're talking about design as a bridge, but you almost sound like design as a moderator, a moderator to, what we want these technologies to be able to do, and thinking through what they should or should not do. And if I make that extension to education, Eileen, where I'm thinking about, and I had conversations recently with a computer science professor who basically said, we're teaching stuff to our undergraduate students, but the AI is already a lot better than what the students can do. So, imagine having the lenses or having a headset where you're in the classroom and basically the AI does all the work for you, which is obviously currently a big debate, in education of, how do we integrate AI into the classroom? But, when it becomes invisible computing, like the problem will, as Wallace said, explode even further. So yeah, maybe you want to speak a little bit about that, because like obviously there's the positive sides about what you described. There's like Escape where people can create, but there's also the side of if students are fully equipped with all this equipment and having invisible computing, what are you dealing with in terms of students?
Yeah, I think that's been the main focus, I feel like, in AI in education, is the panic over, well, now everyone's just going to use ChatGPT to write all their papers. And it's been interesting actually in the last, 2 years since the kind of first ChatGPT iteration came out. There hasn't been a lot of evidence that there's been widespread. I think we all know examples of it from our own lives, but in surveying high school students, especially, researchers are not finding that they are wholesale kind of, cheating with these technologies. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the potential, is different from what's happening in practice. And who knows, maybe that will change. Maybe as people who grew up with ChatGPT get older, they'll be more comfortable trying to pass it off as their own work. But I think there's also this is, partly a problem with the education system more broadly that doesn't really have much to do with technology, the technology itself, but kind of people working in learning sciences and educational technology have been saying for decades, and even policymakers too, that we kind of need to change the focus of our education system, knowing that technologies are going to improve a lot and exponentially, and kind of recognizing that we've been focusing on teaching a lot of the wrong things. If it's something we can reasonably predict a computer is going to do really well, why are we spending a lot of time teaching young people how to do that, instead of teaching them how to work with those technologies to do the very unique human things that we need them to do? And this doesn't mean that we get rid of all the kind of, the 3 R's or something. We still mostly all learned addition before we were given a calculator to do it for us. But maybe we don't need to go to spend as much time on the basics of, grammar and spelling and things like that, which are, schools have really focused on. And it almost, swung the wrong way, I think, when, in the early 2000s, we instituted test-based accountability, because it's a lot easier to test a lot of these skills that computers are also really good at doing themselves. So there's broader questions about the education system. And I think thinking about how do you AI proof your class, right? One thing about that is designing assignments that maybe if a student used AI, they would still have to employ their own skills and demonstrate that. Or, thinking also just about how do you integrate these tools into your class so that it's more realistic to what people are going to need to do in the future anyway. So working with Copilot, right? So most computer programmers, I think now are learning how to program while using a lot of these tools. I see it in my students, right? They're sure, they're making their own VR experiences, but then they're going to AI tools to try to help them debug their code. And then they're kind of working back and forth. It really is a good way to kind of, shortcut to their own creativity, right? If that's what we really care about. So I don't know if that's a really good answer to your question. I can't even really remember what your question is, but that's one thing that I think about with some of these tools. And then, the other thing I'll say about thinking about design, learning design, and intersecting AI and XR is I think there's a huge potential there as well to design better assessments. Right, so that you can think about performance assessments in an XR environment utilizing AI. It's a much easier task than thinking about, okay, I'm gonna have everybody write a paper and then I'm gonna have to run it through a thing to see whether it was AI generated, or have people do an exam and just keep locking down the conditions under which they can have that exam. In the end, most of the things you're learning how to do, or the content you want people to know, you don't really want them to sit down and fill out an exam with that. You want them to be applying it in real world context, right? So how do we actually assess that? Using XR, I think, is a really powerful tool. We're not there yet. I think there's a lot we have to develop and design, but I think that's the other thing to think about is assessing learning in performance contexts. XR opens up a huge opportunity for that, like our escape room, right?
Yeah.
You're actually solving puzzles and demonstrating problem solving skills, in a way that is, rather than having you sit down and write out what would be your process or.
Absolutely, and I think, a couple of things about that is because, we can potentially, certainly also with XR, think about it in a spatially embodied manner.
Yeah.
Not just because we are oftentimes testing people, what they write down or what they type in, but now you could take in the whole context and look at that. And I think the data set that I showed with the area classes where people were cooking, etc., you're able to, that's basically the starting point for being able to assess. So when I'm working on my bike or cooking, basically I could get assistance and said, well, maybe you should add a little bit more salt. I tend to not put too much salt into my food for good reasons, but I might need to sometimes add a little extra salt. But you could get some tips like that, that's sort of in context, embodied, that allows these kind of assessments to take place. And I also have one example of that. I showed also the immersive healthcare situation. What's so exciting about that? Of course, when you're doing physical rehabilitation and putting a headset on, feels like a little bit of a contrast because it's a bit potentially uncomfortable, and especially if you have issues with your legs, you don't want to put a headset on that might make it more challenging. However, what it can do is exactly this performance-based assessment. With the XR equipment, it allows to basically diagnose and potentially, and with the help of AI, what kind of movements you're doing in ways that even a physical therapist cannot directly see with their eyes. So especially when you're also using all kind of sensors that potentially are able to measure, for instance, muscle contractions. If you combine that with your actual movements, it provides a holistic understanding of how a person is moving that would aid a physical therapist or somebody else, in understanding what the patient experiences. So those are all kind of ways in which assessment is actually completely radically changing the way that we've been doing it. So yeah, there's all pros and cons, and I'm just thinking about also, speaking about education, one of the things I don't regularly teach, and I recently gave a guest lecture, and for all the students there, maybe all of you are doing this, but I go into the class and everybody sits behind their laptop, and I'm just like thinking about like, what would that work? How would that work in an XR classroom? Like, is everybody sitting behind their headset in a classroom? Like, I already felt disconnected with the students when they're staring at their laptops, and it's such a shame in a way, right? Like, where we're thinking about being connected, especially after the pandemic, and in a classroom where students are not physically present, and presence is actually a big thing in virtual reality research. So yeah, and I can see it go the other way around too. And maybe this is a question to Wallace, is like, what do you think about that? Like, if we put VR, XR into the classrooms, or how do we deal with social connectedness?
Yeah. You don't necessarily have to use VR, right? So
True.
If you use AR, if you use those lenses, you don't have the issue of physical obstruction anymore, or virtual obstruction. You can see clearly whatever is happening. The larger question is, why would you want that, right? Like, which benefits would it provide? And you can, of course, you can go into that line of reasoning, right, and say, if we track everything, right? I'm going to track your eyes and figure out where you pay attention to me. I will look at the results of your exercise. I will draw something on the board, and then the AR system will look at it and it'll translate it to your language. So it makes it easier for you to learn, right? And then you can think, oh, okay, I can do like some adaptive assessment of your knowledge. If you're an advanced student, I'm not going to ask you the easy questions, just the hardest ones, so you make the best use of your money, your tuition money, or whatever. Then we enter into another thing, right? Which is like, one is easy. It's like, yeah, privacy and concerns. How do you deal with that? The other one is actually hard. And I was looking up where the person is right now. So some people would argue from anthropology, just from like early Xerox like research, look into context, right? So you can say, yeah, if I measure everything, I can figure out what you're thinking, and then I can build a reasonably good model of you, right? Now, some people may argue that that's not possible at all, right? Because the context is also something that depends on the action, of different environments, of the cultural background, the actual situation, where you're coming from, where you're going, and that's practically impossible to get, right? So that's the hardest question. Can you really think that that you ever have enough information to know what's going on in someone's mind, right? To eventually make a good assessment, or to understand what the person's going to do next, or to infer, something based on a gaze, in a situation where, even if you think we have cameras all over this room, right? There are all little bit things that you won't be able to know or infer from any data that you can possibly get. I don't have a good answer to that. So
no, but
I mean, these are at the middle of the line there. So,
but I think design considerations is, and thinking about design as a lens to look at these trade-offs and pros and cons, and think about different configurations would be great. And I'm thinking about one of the things that we did not discuss and showcase, because like when we're thinking about XR and AI, one way to kind of think about it, and this also relates to our project, is that you can get a lot of interesting data that could feed the AI to be able to personalize it. Now, obviously, the one thing that we're kind of thinking about is your actions, the things that you're doing. So I was talking about physical rehabilitation, where you're moving. Obviously, when you have a headset, it can also measure your eyes, so it can do something with that. But there's also a lot of technologies, and there's a headset that is about $40,000, and the reason it's so expensive is also because it sort of like measures also what you're doing with your brain. So like all kind of impulses and things that can happen there that can also be leveraged and used to feed the AI. And I was imagining a classroom situation even where I'm thinking whether that's a good thing or not, where you're actually getting cues whether you should speak up or not, or should stop talking. That it's sort of like a red sign, you've spoken too much, or where you see that another student says something and that it tracks whatever happens in your brain and tries to connect and help you give a suggestion of like, oh, you're thinking about that too, and this is how you can connect it. So there's all kinds of ways that that it potentially even helps to build bridges within students in the classroom or help facilitate classroom discussions. But yeah,
But can I interject
Sure.
there? Like, I think some of those things are, to Wallace's point, like, do you want that? Another question about do you want that is, maybe that's just showing us that the classroom is not a really good learning environment. And so why do we just keep like adding on to that instead of, taking a broader perspective of like, if these technologies can help us broaden out like how and where learning is happening and the type of activities you can have, like, if it's really that hard for someone to understand what's going on with their peer and engage in the discussion, it's like maybe there's a bigger problem with that learning environment in general. So I don't know, like, I think I agree. I think there's a lot of really interesting things we can add on, but I feel like I always am pushing back against people who are like, let's just make lectures better.
Yeah.
Right, because it's like lectures are actually pretty good at doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, put people to sleep. Transmit didactic information, right, which is necessary for some learning goals, but then there's like, I don't know, I get more excited about these technologies when they're like used in really different ways that the classroom can't offer. So I don't know, I think like adding more and more, and like you were saying, like even people just sitting behind laptops, this question of like how much our technology is isolating us from each other versus connecting ourselves. And I think, there are engineering perspectives, which are like, of course, if we just make, the networks better and whatever, like connection will happen. But from a design perspective, I think that's why this is a good conversation, is like, why don't we actually think about the way people want to interact with each other and whether they want it mediated by a device or not? Do they want something in their brain? Do they not? I don't know.
Well, speaking of being more social, wanted to kind of like engage in the conversation to others, like if any of you have thoughts, questions. Yeah.
I have sort of thought very interesting conversation. I was interested in the idea of like design as the moderator, and I sort of very much echo with that same idea. And even sort of to say that like, does XR need to be these heavy headsets, right? Like just the example which you mentioned about the escape room. Like if all we need from the escape room is about like the AI getting information of where you are, it's not like you don't need to see like a screen for that, but just knowing where you are and is able to tell you in your sort of mode of audio, maybe just something that is going to reinforce you. So I think it's like also the role of, isn't it the role of design to also make sure, okay, what kind of audience are we catering to, and what is the final goal of this experience that we want, and hence choose, like, do we need to use all the technology that's there in these complex VR or XR sets, or can this just be something which is audio is good enough? Maybe we have a camera, but only the AI knows what is being seen, and you don't need to care or see any added information about it. Just like a thought of what do you think about that?
I mean, the straight answer is, yeah, agreed, right? So there's people who use this term audio augmented reality, right? So you can think about the very extreme where all your senses have been replaced by synthetic stimuli, right? So like VR, perfect VR, it's distinguishable from real world, right? But you can also think about all the intermediate steps where you have like just visual, just haptics, just like audio, right? The point there is that, are you generating something extra that's not in the world, but can augment somehow your experience? Some places it will be audio, some places will be, visual, some places will be a combination of both. So, yeah, that's a design question, right? What is the best modality, right? If you're trying to achieve a certain task or a certain goal, how will you go about achieving that?
And I think too, it's also like a good question about how do we use the minimum amount of technology and the least level of fidelity necessary to achieve what we want? And I think, that's one of the things is you don't always need. That's another thing I run into with people who don't know a lot about VR, but are excited about it in education. They're like, oh, if we just put everything in VR, it'll be better. And that's definitely not the right answer, right? It's good for certain purposes at certain times, but sometimes a good old book and a piece of paper and a pencil are better.
I mean, related to that, there's the story of, when you had the Morse code and the telegraph, so that telegraph operators would recognize each other by the style of their,
funny.
clicking. So their hands, everyone had a particular hand. So, which, it falls in line with this discussion about the affordances, like we adopt or we adapt ourselves to the expressiveness of the affordances, and we can always get more out of it than what we think. Like it's same thing with text messages. Like they are widely used. They don't have a lot of affordances, but they, so I think this kind of lowest amount of fidelity is an interesting principle to think about.
Your thoughts based on this conversation? Yeah.
A few thoughts on the first Microsoft video you showed. I got a little anxious just seeing everybody in these HoloLens around all this heavy equipment. I was like, okay, first of all, that's a workplace accent waiting to happen. And I was like, okay, I can see some of the applications where they're like asking for service records. Those aren't usually wrong, but when they're asking these more specific questions about like how the motor is made up, at what point are we like, okay, there might be like a 5% error rate, but farther down the line, that could destroy a huge piece of equipment like that. I think that was a bit of like a unrealistic application, as I think a lot of these things are. Where do we draw the line and be like, okay, we need to step back and kind of, before we use AI and all these other things, we need to make sure the AI is actually usable first. So just basically some sort of, I'm wondering some sort of timeline between before like that's a realistic use of AI.
Yeah. Well, you make me think a little bit about an application I was working with. Martin also stepped in. We were working on a project that was sponsored by the Department of Defense, and we were working on an application where you would repair ships or other kind of equipment. And you can imagine they were telling us all the time, like, imagine this ship is out on sea, things are happening. And then you would repair in a very, risky situation. You put your headset on and then start to repair it. And do you really think that would happen? So there's all these contexts where, it seems really plausible that it could work, but practically, in terms of safety or just the situation itself, when people are, stressed or anxious or something needs to be quickly done, there's those issues. There are also ways to think about it in terms of error, because we're thinking about the AI, but XR can also connect you to another expert, right? So, like one of the really great applications that, got me really excited was actually in hospital context. For instance, if somebody anywhere in the world needs to do a particular surgery, or what happens is that there might be experts elsewhere in the world and they can be connected through XR. It creates other kind of problems because like those people are few and there might be worldwide demands. So it creates other problems, but there are ways to kind of like think about it. But I agree, we sometimes tend to think, this technology looks great, but then the practical applications is less so. And then we're not even talking about the AI and the practical applications of that, right? Like, I actually got into a situation recently where I couldn't find the citation. I was working on a paper, and I couldn't reach my co-authors who suggested that. So I was like, okay, I'll Google it. I couldn't find the citation, so I was like asking the AI to produce the citation, and it produced their citation. And I was like, I don't believe you. I really don't believe you. So then,
was it right?
It was right. Yes. And later on, the colleague came back to me and gave the reference, and and it was right about this. But it's also like, even if it uses right information, I wasn't ready to accept it. So yeah, that also creates all these kind of issues that we haven't really fully resolved. And will you just get a percentage of you get a recommendation from the AI and it says there's like 80% chance I'm right. What do you do with that 80% when you're working on a $20,000 equipment? It's like, am I going to take my chances?
One more little comment about what you were saying with the kids in the cave system and the settings. You're like, well, it's great that we can make these experiences where they don't need to know Unity and all that, and where you don't need to have this crazy background. First, I was like, okay, great. There goes like 40% of the co-ops I was going to apply to. And then I was thinking, doesn't that take a lot of creativity out of it if you're just giving a prompt to an AI and boom, it's there? It's not original. It's not coming from your own brain. I mean, it's like, do you, is it for those kids, do they see that as their own work, or does it hold the same value as, like, I don't know, drawing a picture for these children?
Yeah, it's a good question, I guess. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think there's different ways to think about if you can educate those kids about where this is coming from, right? Like, this is actually amalgamating a bunch of artists' prior work.
Artists, yeah.
Yeah. And being honest about that, and like, how that kind of like fits into the picture. But I think for a lot of people who don't have any technical artistic skills, I like playing with AI image generators myself. Yeah, I guess I don't think about it as like my own creative practice necessarily, but to be able to have a picture in your mind and then be able to see it without being restricted in the skills you have. But I don't know. I mean, I would pose that to some of the artists in the room. Like you have an AI trained on your own poetry.
That's true.
Right. But then like, how do you feel about writing poetry with other AI or?
Yeah. I'm a poet who works with XR and with AI. And I would argue that creative research is really important because it allows you, to Wallace's point, engage with some of these like gray areas and nebulous things in different ways than regular research. I also don't see it as limiting in any way. I see it as potentiating. Take off artist hat, put on like teacher and corporate hat. It also allows you to engage in rapid prototyping. So it allows students and people who might not have technical skills to participate and be part of the conversation, and to be part of, like, when we talk about participatory design, it's enabling and potentiating our humanity rather than limiting it. So it's bringing more people to the party, and then if they're like, hey, this is rad, then they can, like, it's not gonna, I think, deter anyone who might feel offended.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, that makes me think of another point, which is what I see a lot of with some of these tools is that they're so limiting in what you can get out of them that often they actually serve to be pretty good like motivators to learn some of those skills yourself, right? Because you're like, oh, I typed this in, AI gave me this half solution, but like I want this piece to be able to move, or I want to interact, like, programming in the interactivity and stuff is more complex. So I don't think that it means that some of those technical skills are going to be unnecessary, but I do think it means like, you don't need to know Morse code. Like, we've developed ways to interact with technologies with more natural language. That's the same way I think some of these technologies could facilitate more natural ways for people who don't have that expertise. But for students, I do think it is kind of a motivator to be able to use something that gets you part of the way there. And then you're like, oh, I actually want to learn how to do that because I want to make it better. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm an artist. I've been like drawing my whole life. And also been posting my art online since like middle school. So it's been a whole life. So like I've seen AI art and its rise like in recent years, and I have complicated feelings towards it because I am a computer science student. but I'm also an artist, so there's like that confliction of I don't agree with this morally, but at the same time, it's really cool technology. But like with your comment about like motivation, I've seen online the opposite. Like a lot of people like that call themselves AI artists use AI for easy profit and then call themselves artists, which obviously causes like a heated debate of like, are you really an artist? And also the whole ethics of stealing art from other artists, like doing these generators. So I've kind of seen the opposite where I've seen a rise of people using generators for like easy profit, like kind of increasing laziness, which I think is like applicable to a lot of generative AI. So I feel like to be a motivation, because yeah, I feel like that could be a thing where like you use AI and then motivate you to learn that. I agree that would be a good thing. But I feel like there has to be some secondary motivator to like prevent people from like using this AI and then just sticking with it. There needs to be some other force that makes them move past AI. So.
And I also think there needs to be more done about literacy around these tools too. Like, where did this actually come from? Like the fact that it is a lot of stolen images and text, you know, that it's being built on, even like individual people's likenesses. I don't think there's enough conversation about that either. So, yeah, very true.
So one thought I had about this conversation a little bit with regards to, and bringing it back also a little bit to thinking about design, is that, you know, some of these technologies enable us to do things that we didn't think about before that also help us to reflect our own practices. So one recent exciting aspect that I saw was that at the conference, they now had a competition of creating a song out of your paper and using AI for it. And this sounds, you know, to some extent a little bit silly and whatnot, but you know, the people did that. And I was listening to the song and it was AI generated. You also had to provide input to it, but it provided a different way to communicate what your paper is about. And also like listening to it and hearing the message also makes you think about, well, what is really the message about what my paper is? And some of you may have tried Notebook LM, but it also allows you to create a podcast. And obviously I put my own papers in, listen to the podcast and laugh a little bit about, you know, how it was exaggerating many of the points. But I had to admit at the end that the podcast did a better job of telling what the message was than the paper itself. But that also allowed me to kind of think about what really is the message of it. So some of these extensions, whether it's XR, AI, you know, also allows us to reflect back on our own practices. So that's a good thing, potentially. But then where is it pushing us to be better? Because we also see that maybe these technologies allow us to do things and just be satisfied with it. Like, you know, is it AI art if it generates art? Like, so is there a way for us to be pushing it further and more forward? And I'll just throw my own spiel around this. Like, I personally believe or try to work on bringing in playfulness in ways as we're working with AI and XR to kind of like try to play around with these aspects and try to push us talking about motivation to go a little bit further than just whatever is generated at first, to really try to go beyond. But yeah.
I would just say that this seems to be very antagonistic goals, right? Does it make sense? Like, first it would require, like, if you go to what you're saying, right? So, oh, it's not perfect, so it gives me the motivation. But what we really want as, you know, computer science is for it to be perfect, right? We don't want it to be perfect. That's not the goal, and eventually we will get there. And what happens then, right? And that exactly what you're saying, right? So, okay, how can you give the extra motivation so that I can go there and do the work by hand, right? It's completely antagonistic as well, right? I mean, my goal as being, you know, the owner of a mega corporation is for it to be efficient. And, you know, if I have an AI system that can make you, you know, produce faster and do more drawings in half of the time, that's the thing that's going to stick, right? So that's again, like maybe like a design question, right? Because like both the market and the, technology progression seem to be at odds with, what you just said.
Yeah, sure. And even in education, right, the incentives are like to ace your test and with the least amount of effort, right? If we thought about how we motivate students differently to tinker and play and fail, and we rewarded that instead of, this efficiency model, like, yeah, that's about the conditions under which we use and design the technologies too, so. Yeah, it's a good point. What about when it is perfect is a little scarier.
Here's a question in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm interested to know the perspective of the panelists about design being as an advocate, a representative of user rights in the context of AI-driven advancements, particularly in high-stakes situations, and what are their comments on challenges of it? The perspective, okay, design being an advocate, a representative of user rights in the context of AI-driven advancements in high-stakes situations.
Design as an advocate, that besides being a more, you say,
moderator.
Moderator.
Yeah, moderator.
So can I tap into this question to ask maybe more specifically, what is that design really can bring them? So what are the skills and the competencies that we as designers can put at the service of this innovation that we want to achieve? Really, what is that we can, what is it we can embrace? It's yeah, if anything.
What do you think, Paul?
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I had a question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
But maybe that's something it's an exercise that maybe we need to do. Really distill what is that really to do. It's something we can certainly do. I mean, one competence I think we have is being good at representing things so that many people can understand again. So that's maybe a part of the competence we can offer, like be able to represent things in a way that other people can understand. Just thinking about one competence in particular, something that is less precise, that is like being able to understand people. That's something that we meant to know. That's something that we can put at the service yeah, but I don't know, it was honest question.
No, exactly. I mean, my first response to that, and maybe others have thoughts on this too, is sort of like a more holistic systemic understanding of the technology with regards to all these different characteristics that influence and play a role, right? Like we can think about the different stakeholders, the end users, but also address issues like what is in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of responsible design. We take all the different aspects into account to really think through these kind of situations. So for instance, like again, we go to the contact lens that was presented, it sounds like a cool technology, but maybe not fully thought through. And I think, if you have design, be part of that conversation, you would take a more holistic approach to thinking through these kind of new technologies. So that would be my first response to that.
I was thinking about it actually as like, the first question is one answer to your question, which is like, one way that I think about design being more helpful than just like engineering these technologies, but designing them is by including broader populations and their desires for them. So in that sense, design as an advocate is like a participatory process. So when I think about learning design and using these technologies, it's like, I'm always starting with working with teachers, right? Like, what are they struggling to teach? What are their students struggling to learn? Engaging them in the process rather than just what I see a lot of, on the other side is like, what can this technology do? And then let's shoehorn that into an educational goal. I think those are just like different approaches. So I don't know if that really answers the question about advocating, like design as an advocate, but like, that's one way I think about design as a different process compared to, you know, just focusing on the technology first.
Yeah, advocating maybe it's strong, but
Yeah.
certainly we need to, we are usually the ones representing or standing for the user, like, you know,
Yeah,
and society more in general, so that's a role that we need to play. But sometimes technologies, you know, engineers or technology specialists, they don't embrace that much, or they like, you know, make it a thing. So this morning we had another conversation, another discussion. And there was this difference between something that is feasible versus something that is, or not versus, but something that is desirable. So not because something is feasible, it's necessarily desirable. So, and that's where design maybe can have something to say. What is desirable? What is then deserves to be desired? Or, and yeah, that's maybe the role that we can play. And
Yeah, what is it ought to be, right?
yeah, that was I brought that Albert Simon definition of it.
Yeah, so, yeah, this is the, and when you say that, oh, well, doesn't really seem that they think that well, or that they thought about these aspects, right? It's like, oh, Google, it's a very large company. They didn't think about how people would react to a certain product. It's unlikely, right? They did think about it. It's just the question is that it's so complicated, right? Humans are so complicated, society is so complicated that sometimes it's really hard. It's not just the right question. There are things that you want to figure out in this field. Perturb the system somehow, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, I think those videos are really useful because then it make us, you know, discussing it. They are very clear, very, you really feel what's going on in this video, and then you react. They have a role, like, you know, they're designed maybe by some designers. Something goes in this video, these scenarios. They're pretty useful because then you can gather around those videos and have a conversation and say, okay, well, I don't like it. I would buy it. So yeah, I won't buy it. Then
yeah, I wasn't even talking about the video itself, right? But the whole idea, right? And the idea can be very broad. It can be like, oh, let's use AR in education. It can be like, let's use AR in the industry. It can be, oh, let's use it to, I don't know, play video games, right? How that idea is like received and which changes it will cause in, you know, the society, in the relationship with each other, the relationship with technology. People don't think about those things all the time, but it's a really complex thing to just predict. Oh yeah, this product is gonna fail. Let's not just launch it.
Yeah, but I think this is, you know, obviously design has played a role, but I think that's where design could be more of an advocate of, to kind of think through what are these complex relationships and how can we, you know, can we have certain guidelines or certain aspects that help us think through what to consider. And that doesn't mean that we get it right. You know, it's not like,
no, my argument is that we need more designers, right?
Yeah.
Because it's clearly not enough, right?
Yeah.
We need more of this like high level systemic thinking, so that those things go to where they ought to be.
I think design could be helpful too, and like actually providing people more choice and agency within these technologies, especially when you think about privacy, right? Like a lot of people want an Alexa in their house because it's so convenient. But if they have the choice to not have Amazon listening to everything that they said, like what would they choose? A lot of these products are an either or, right? Every website you go to, you have to accept their terms and conditions. There's no like, you know, kind of middle area of what you're consenting to. Things like that, I think about, could design help build a better understanding and, you know, kind of help move us. But that also requires a different regulatory environment because right now it's big business. You know, you need to collect all that data, otherwise your products aren't going to be profitable. So it takes a few different things that have to change.
There's another question in the chat, right?
How is communication with lay people included in the design process to encourage buy-in and combat misinformation? There seems to be tension between viewing technology as supplementing versus supplanting. people tend to be afraid of the latter hindering adoption. So how is communication with lay people included in the design process to encourage buy-in and combat misinformation?
It's from
think it's a real person.
It's from David D. Not sure.
You had a response to that?
Slay, snap, tell him I snapped and said slay.
Okay.
It's our David, right?
Yeah.
Would you not slap and slay?
No, if it's like a massive, no. Yes, right? Yes, these, like, those are exactly the questions that we should be having in conversation. We're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of related to the discussion we're having about, taking stakeholders into consideration, also looking into places where we would not anticipate technology potentially be used, but these people will be affected by it. I think there's lots of examples with AI, but also with XR, especially when we're thinking about things being visual, the audio aspects can be interesting from that perspective too. But we are always, we need to be mindful of that. And I think design can also play a role with that. Like that's the responsible perspective that I mentioned, as well as the humane perspective, like thinking about the accessibility too. So that would be my quick response to that. Yeah.
I mean, because the regulatory aspect and AI images stealing from artists has come up a few times. I'm curious because right now there's a lawsuit against the Internet Archive, so the Internet Archive is offline because they are basically, renting out books that you can see, watch for an hour, and then you can kind of return it. And they are, interpreting the fair use clause of copyright in a, very liberal way, which is of course great, I think. But I see in the discussion of the AI copyright, obviously a lot of AI models are actually trained on stone books. There are some discoveries, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to basically say that everything that I choose to train my models with, I'm stealing, because a lot of that rhetoric and line of argumentation leads into curtailing and restriction of the fair use doctrine or the fair use clause that academics rely on. And like a lot of that argument is used also to really limit what academics can cite. So maybe training needs to be considered a different form of publishing format or something, or a different form of use. But I would be careful calling that stealing if I'm training something that's publicly available. I'm just curious, what your thoughts are.
Well, I think part of that has to do also with some of these questions about how do lay people understand what is publicly available, right? People don't always understand that everything they put on the internet was being scraped, everything, that, and what they showed with I guess you weren't here, but the video of the smart glasses that could, automatically recognize so many people and access their information is people don't realize that that's public, that can be, manipulated in a way too. So, it's kind of it's one thing when it's something that's been published in a more traditional sense, like a book, a painting, when it's things that people put online, I think there is, and then there's also, it's the profit question too, right? Copyright law is mostly intended to protect people being able to profit off their work, and then has been manipulated by corporations to be able to profit off of other people's work after they are dead. But I don't know, I guess I have mixed feelings about it, but you're right, like, I think we don't want to prohibit people from being able to remix and access information at the same time. I think there are some, once the profit motive gets involved, like,
And it's very interesting. It's a very tenuous line, right? If I go to the museum and I look at a painting, right, and I carefully replicate it, am I stealing that painting? Right? It's a rhetorical question.
My answer
right?
is no.
Yeah, it's great, right? So if I train like a model that does the same thing, is it stealing it? What if it remakes stuff, right? And I think that brings to the same question that there's always there, right? Like what is a human, what's intelligence and what is not, right? So if I go somewhere and write like by my own, right? Like a great composition, music of my people will say, oh wow, so you're very good, right? You're a great composer, you did all this thing, right? So if I throw in a LLM, then people will know, oh no, it just ran an algorithm, right? Somehow that affects the perception on which side of the line you are.
But it's also a kind of this very romantic idea of creation. Like algorithmic art has existed for 100 years. This idea of the genius creating something as the only measure of artistic production, I think it's also something that is disturbing in this discussion.
I think you need to wrap up.
Yeah, well, we did have another question in the chat, but
I would read it in any case because I don't know if we have time to answer, but I think it's very interesting as a scenario.
Go for it.
Okay.
How close do you think we can bring the wearable industry to AI? For example, could we create devices that are AI powered, visually appealing, and can provide information on dental and oral health using saliva?
That sounds
sounds like a great PhD program.
Yeah. December 1st, this so it sounds like it's great for it. Great, but yeah, we do already see all these wearable devices, right? Like from smartwatches, and they're also already using a lot more sensors and information, and that could extend to other places of our body. So,
yeah. I think it's not that far. So yeah. Thank you, everybody. It was great conversation, interesting, and thank you for Casper for moderating and panelists for joining us and all of you. Next month we have the last conversation. The last conversation next month will be. Thank you.